Appreciate that, Brother Wayne. All right. Well, today we want to continue our discussion of what worship looks like in the Lord's church. So we got started on that last week, and this kind of an overview of this. We didn't dive into it real deep, but looking at a few passages related to teaching, singing, giving, and we kind of, the bell college, we were talking about prayer. So I'm not reread all of these verses, but just kind of bits and pieces, some of these, and then look at some closing thoughts on prayer. As we said, there are a number of acts of worship or elements of worship, however you want to refer to that, that certainly apply to the worship itself. There are some of these that it can take place outside of worship as well. Prayer is one of these. So prayer is certainly an element of worship, but prayer is something we can participate in anytime we want to, throughout the day, throughout our lives. And as we stated, and some of y'all said it better than I could say it, what a wonderful blessing it is to know that any time that we want to, we can approach our Creator in prayer. But what an awesome responsibility. What an awesome gift that is for us to be able to communicate with the Lord. In Acts 2:42, and as we mentioned last time, we're talking about the 5 acts of worship, or the 5 parts of worship. You find all 5 of these mentioned in Acts 2:42 through 47. The birthday of the church. All 5 are mentioned in that context. It says they continue steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship and in breaking of bread and in prayers. So prayer is something that continues steadfastly in. Part of the worship service, but a part of our daily lives. Something we want to participate in. They lifted up their voice to God with one accord. They were continuing in prayer, continuing instant in prayer, praying without ceasing, making our supplications known to God. Things that are important to you, things that matter to you, talk to God about it. Now the Bible talks about even if God says no, He says He doesn't upbraid you for what you asked for. He's not going to ridicule you for it. So things that are important to you, talk to God about it. Ask Him about those things. 1 Timothy 2:8 says, I will therefore that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubt. So we pray everywhere, anywhere, any time of the day that we want to. Prayer was made for Peter when he was in prison. Paul and Silas prayed in prison. They knelt down and Paul knelt and prayed with the Ephesian elders in Acts 20. Did the same thing as he is on his way to Jerusalem. And again, on and on, we looked at a number of these verses here. Again, continuing in prayer, so forth. In everything, giving thanks to God. We saw Jesus' example of prayer. Jesus was a praying man. He prayed continually. When he was baptized, he prayed. When he was about to choose the 12 apostles, he continued all night in prayer to God. Can you imagine that, being able to pray all night? Think about what I would run out of things to say. I'm not a talkative person anyway. But Jesus was able to pray all night there to the Father. Often, Jesus went off by himself and prayed. Great example to follow. This one right here, a great while before day, Jesus was praying. He withdrew himself in the wilderness and prayed. The great prayer that he prayed in John 17, I've heard Brother Dallas and others talk about, that's the real Lord's Prayer. Beautiful prayer that he prayed there with his apostles that night he was arrested. While he's in the Mount of Olives, he calls Peter, James, and John to him and prays a very intimate prayer there. The last thing that he did is he prayed. His last words on the cross were a prayer to God. So Jesus was a praying man. We talked about last time that there's so many passages that talk about whatever we ask, we receive of Him. To pray with confidence. Now we want to pray that it be God's will. I told you there's some things I prayed for years ago that I didn't get that I'm thankful now I didn't get. So He knows best what's best for us. He knows better than we do. But we need to pray with confidence. Again, over and over. You shall ask what you will, and it'll be done unto you. If any lack wisdom, let him ask of God. Dad talked about that in the James class a while back. Jesus said, whatsoever you shall ask in my name, that will I do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you shall ask anything in my name, I will do it. 1 John 5:14-15. This is the confidence that we have in him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he heareth us. And if we know that he hear us, whatsoever we ask, we know that we have the petitions that we desired of him. So pray with confidence. Pray according to his will. Pray things that he would be willing for us to have or do. But we need to pray to the Lord. Yes, Charlie.
Well, in Mark 9:29 it says, and he said unto them, this kind can come forth by nothing but prayer and fasting.
Prayer is powerful. What does James 5:16 say? The effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. So there's a lot of good that comes from praying. Now that's where we left off last time, some limitations to prayer. And y'all may think of some other things here, but a couple of verses I found. In James 4:2-3, it says, ye lust and have not, ye kill and desire to have and cannot obtain. Ye fight and war, yet ye have not, because you ask not. Ye ask and receive not, because ye ask amiss, that you may consume it upon your own lust. I think that's one thing that we see in prayer. And you see this a number of times in prayers of Christ and prayers of others, that our prayers shouldn't be all about us. There's nothing wrong with praying for things that are important to you and praying for your family. But we want to pray for the good of the whole, and we want to pray for others in our prayers. We want to be unselfish in our prayers. We were studying in our Bible class at school the other day, thinking about Solomon, and y'all are all familiar with that. When Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings at Gibeon, and he did that in front of the original tabernacle. I'd forgotten that piece of the thing, but in front of the original tabernacle, and offer those offerings on the original altar that Moses had built, which is where they were supposed to worship. That God was very pleased with that. But you remember that God said you can have, he was so pleased, you can have whatever you want. Have you ever thought if God were to give you one wish, what you would ask for? I wish I could say that I know I would pray as unselfishly as Solomon did. I'm not sure that I would. But you remember what Solomon asked for? Wisdom. Lord, give me wisdom that I can rule this great people. What an unselfish request. And we know that God was very pleased with that, because he gave him those other things that he didn't ask for. Gave him riches and fame and all that. But again, we want to be careful that we are praying, that we're not asking amiss, that it's not just for selfish things. We want to pray unselfishly. I think that's important. Brother Doug, we talk about Doug in his prayers often makes this statement. And so here's another condition, a limitation of prayer. But if you forgive not men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. So one of the things that I like to pray for, I feel like I need to pray for, is forgiveness of sins. I mess up every day. I think about my dealings with my players and my students and my family and with you all, and think about how many times I mess up on a daily basis, not meaning to, not trying to. One of the things, my deepest regrets in coaching and in teaching is times I've offended kids and offended players. That's not what I've wanted to do, but I've messed. So we all mess up sometimes. But it says, if we're not willing to forgive others, God won't forgive us. So there's a limitation of prayers. We need to have a forgiving spirit related to others. Proverbs 15 and verse 8. The sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but the prayer of the upright is his delight. So another condition of prayer is, I've heard Brother Donald talk about this too, one condition to prayer is that we are doing what we ought to do. That we're in the light, we're walking in the light. He hears the prayers of the righteous, we're told. Proverbs 15:29. The Lord is far from the wicked, but he heareth the prayers of the righteous. Proverbs 28 and verse 9. He that turneth away his ear from hearing the law, even his prayer shall be abomination. Someone that's not walking the light, God is not going to listen to that person. And the one I've heard Donald quote many times, John 9:31. You remember the man that was healed by Christ. And so he was questioned by the Jewish leaders and all this sort of thing. But they're questioning him, and they're asking him about Jesus. He said, well, he's of Beelzebub. He is doing these things through the devil. But here's what this guy says. Now we know that God heareth not sinners, but if any man be a worshiper of God and doeth his will, him he heareth. So for God to hear our prayers, we want to be doing those things that God would have us to do. 1 Peter 3 and verse 12, Peter said, "For the eyes of the Lord are over the righteous, and his ears are open unto their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against them that do evil." Now this is a quote. Peter is actually quoting from Psalm 34, verse 12 beginning. "What man is he that desireth life, and loveth many days, that he may see good? Keep thy tongue from evil, and thy lips from speaking guile." So again, talking about living right, doing right. And again, I can't speak for you, but my mouth gets me in more trouble than anything in my life. It says, "Depart from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. The eyes of the Lord are upon the righteous, and his ears are open unto their cry. The face of the Lord is against them that do evil, to cut off the remembrance of them from the earth." So some of the conditions of prayer is that, again, I don't ask in the wrong way or for the wrong types of things, but also that I'm in accordance with what God would have me to do. I'm living like the Lord would have me to live. Charlie.
Well, in Matthew 5:44 it says, "But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you."
Charlie, you stole one off my next slide. All right, you are trying to steal my thunder. Yes, I think that's one of the hardest verses in the whole Bible, Charlie. I think one of the hardest verses in the whole Bible. So, to Charlie's point, we want to pray even for our enemies. That's not easy to do. That's not easy to do. To pray for those, as Charlie said, those that hate us, and we're going to pray for them. That's what we're told to do. And that's the example that Jesus gave, isn't it? So you think about him hanging on the cross. Again, if some people had nailed me to a cross, I wouldn't be thinking real good thoughts about those individuals that had done that. And yet Jesus is able to make this statement. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what to do." Now, of course, the forgiveness came later on in Acts 2, those who repented and were baptized and so forth. But it's not our job. Ultimate forgiveness is with God. But as far as it relates to us, we want to always be willing and quick to forgive others. And again, that's not easy to do. But who is wronged more than Jesus? Who is wronged more unjustly than him? And he had prayed for those that had done that to him. Stephen, again, another great example. The very first Christian martyr that's recorded, they stoned Stephen, calling upon God and saying, "Lord Jesus, receive my spirit." And he kneeled down and cried with a loud voice, "Lord, lay not this sin to their charge." Again, I'm not that good of a Christian yet. I'm working on it. I might be saying, "Lord, strike them all dead," but that's not what he prayed. "Lord, lay not this sin to their charge." And when he had said this, he fell asleep. So the last words that Stephen said was, "Lord, forgive those that have done this." And one of those that had done that is who became the Apostle Paul. And so later on, he is going to be forgiven. I wonder what effect that prayer had on Paul. That he heard that, and maybe that generated in his mind a little bit. But that attitude, that forgiving attitude, is what makes so much difference in the lives of so many others. Brother Scott, you had a point.
I always kind of wondered how God looked at the prayers of some of our great generals, like General Patton. I'm not General Patton's final judge, but when you pray for good, clear weather that you may abolish your enemies, it's a strange prayer. I'm not saying that God didn't answer his prayer. Of course, he answers all of our prayers if we're righteous. But yet at the same time, of course, David prayed that his enemies would, shall we just say, fall by the wayside, maybe? So, I mean, there are some prayers that might make us stop and think, is that the best kind of prayer to pray? But yet at the same time, Well, and I'm not sure exactly where this fits in, but it just jumped into my mind. If God be for us, who can be against
Yeah.
us? So I don't know. It's just sometimes the idea of killing another man, and then asking for dry powder, and to be very accurate, and things like that. I think it's a hard thing to feel good about.
Yeah. Kind of be reconciled.
One of his chaplains
Yeah.
was praying for him, didn't he? Prayed for good weather.
Right, and that chaplain wasn't too thrilled about doing it, but he did like he was asked.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was the one I was thinking about.
Well, David is an interesting case study, and I think that's a great one you bring up. You know, it's kind of like when David had the opportunity. Y'all remember 2 times that David had the chance to kill Saul. One time when he wandered into the cave and had a chance to kill him and didn't, said, "I will not strike that Lord's anointed." And then another time where a deep sleep fell on them during the night, and he snuck into the camp and took Saul's spear and his water jug. And Abishai is right there with him and says, "David, let me strike him. But this is the moment that God has delivered your enemy to you." And remember what he said, "I will not strike the Lord's anointed." But then in the things that he said is, you know, perhaps Saul's going to die of old age, or perhaps he'll die in battle. So that's one of the things he said, maybe he'll die in battle. But I think that's, you know, a thing for us. You know, sometimes when we're in a difficult situation, or maybe someone is not treating us right, we pray for relief and let God handle that how he will. You know, the ultimate relief is if we could change the mindset of that individual that is against us. You know, as we talked about that before, it's kind of the idea of, you know, we're talking about turning the other cheek, doing good to our enemy, feeding those that are trying to harm us. And part of the deal is turning the enemy into a friend. That's what we hope to do. But then, you know, God, and talking about in some of the Psalms, that God handled that however he's going to handle that. You know, that God is the one that's going to deal with the individual, whether here in the next world or whatever, and that we not take matters in his own hand, I think is one of the things along that line. But that's a great point.
Like in wartime, probably men on both sides are praying to God.
Yeah.
You know, for
Absolutely.
for protection. So which one does God listen
Yes.
to?
Well, it's kind of like, you know, and again, I'm just talking related to myself. I always feel funny or awkward. I'm reluctant to, like in football, to pray for victory.
Yeah.
Maybe I should. Maybe that's one of the reasons we lost all 7 games we played this year. But you know, why should I pray that we're going to win and assume that there's not people on the other side that are better than me? You know, so again, I don't feel real comfortable praying, "Lord, you give us the victory. You know, help us to play well and give me wisdom and all that." But I don't feel comfortable, you know, praying that he intervene in the outcome or whatever. But
Brother,
that's me.
But if you're doing your job, and your job is to win football games, and you've committed in your life to be the best person you can be, I don't have a problem with praying for success.
Yeah.
And yes, and I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm not saying it's wrong to pray
You're
that.
saying it's
Yes.
wrong either, but
I'm just saying I don't feel comfortable
right,
doing that myself. But
exactly.
I would not fall out for somebody.
Sometimes we pray for things to improve in our daily life, and then we think, how does that compare to someone who lives in a war zone who doesn't have heat or electricity or food or water to drink?
Yeah.
And it's kind of humbling. And so I'm being kind of selfish, just praying that you know, things work well for me, and,
Yeah.
and I have all those things and just take them for granted. You know?
Right. Yeah, you know, like going back to the football example, like sometimes it may be God's will in the big picture may be better that you not have success in the moment for something later on. And it's kind of like, you know, if you say, well, okay, well, I really want to win this football game and get in the playoffs. Well, what if you get in the playoffs and you're traveling to the playoff game, and somebody associated with your team was in a car wreck and got killed. Well, it would have been better if you had not won to get in the playoffs. So, God can see the big picture. We can't. So that's why I think we always need to pray. I know y'all know this, but Lord, your will be done. You know better than I do. You can see the future. I can't in that regard. Here's the one that Charlie mentioned a minute ago. And as I said, I think this is one of the hardest verses in the Bible as far as a command. You have heard that it hath been said, thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies. Love your enemies. That's not easy to do. Love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Somebody's cursing me out and I'm going to bless them. Say, God bless you. That's not easy to do. Do good to them that hate you. Somebody that hates me, I'm going to do good to them. Pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. Somebody that's using me, persecuting me, I'm going to pray for them. Again, that's not an easy command to follow. But it's, I've used this example before with y'all too, and I say this again. Hope y'all don't get tired of me using the same ones. But I used to talk to my players sometimes at the middle school. From time to time, I have one of my players that get in a fight with somebody, and I remember on more than one occasion, talking to a young man and saying, "Well, why do you get in a fight with this person? He doesn't like me." Well, you beat him up. Does he like you better now? So that's not a way to make friends. How do you make friends? How do you make friends with somebody that doesn't like you? By going the extra mile with them. And sometimes that won't work. My wife was talking about this verse the other day in a situation in school, and she mentioned this, but Romans 12:18 is a passage I've always liked. It says, if it be possible, that implies it's not always possible, if it be possible, as much as lieth in you, everything that you can do, live peaceably with all men. So what does that imply? It's not possible to live peaceably with some people. Some people won't leave you alone. But do everything that you can to be at peace with others. And if we have this type of attitude, doing good to those that are doing bad to me, I might win them over. And I might be able to make an impact on them eternally, which is why we take that approach. Romans 10:1, you remember Paul's prayer. Brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they might be saved. And he goes on to say, again, an amazing statement to me, he says, I could wish myself anathema for their sake. I wish myself to be lost. Now again, that's impossible to do. You can't be lost for somebody else, but an unbelievable mindset, how badly he wanted them to be saved and to be right with the Lord. And one other thing mentioned along that line, Jesus said, give us this day our daily bread. And so another thing we pray for is our daily bread. So those are some things related to prayer. And again, this you could go into weeks talking about prayer, but just a few things I want to share with you along that line. Brother Scott.
I wonder if we need to do a word study on that, on the love your neighbor. I mean, what kind of love are we talking about? That we would just hope that they would receive I'm not sure exactly how to put that because I mean, what kind of love should we show towards our enemy? You're obviously not going to put your weapon down if you're in the middle of a war and pray for somebody. But yet at the same time, when you love someone, you wish for the best for them.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the kind of love that we should show towards our enemy. But like you said just a bit ago with David and Saul, I think that Saul's probably got, or could possibly have a coal of fire poured on his head for the kind of love that David showed towards him. And,
well, both times that David spared his life, Saul was very repentant for the moment, very sorry for the moment,
right,
and changed his mind later on, but made an impact at least for a moment with him. Good point.
It's a strange thing.
Yeah, it is. Yes, it is. Charlie, you had a point.
Boy, Matthew 6. It says, when thou, when thou prayest, enter into thy closet, and when thou hast shut thy door, pray to the Father, which is in secret, and thy Father, which seeth in secret, shall reward thee openly.
Well, I should have touched on that, Charlie. So it's wrong for us to pray publicly then, is it?
Yeah.
But it goes back to kind of that modus of prayer, isn't it? And that is a good passage. I should have we don't pray to be seen of men. Did Jesus ever pray publicly? Yeah, he did. But our purpose for prayer is not so that people pat us on the back and say, what a beautiful prayer that is. But yes, good passage, Charlie. All right. Any thoughts on
One
prayer?
of the side effects of praying for your enemy, it may not change your enemy, but it changes you. It keeps you from sinning against God. I think that's one of the side effects we don't think about sometimes.
I've heard you make that point. That's an excellent
Yeah, I
point.
have made that point.
No, that's an excellent point. Excellent point. Excellent point. Dan.
You know, speaking to what Scott was talking about a while ago about war, you think about all these things, and you can look at it you can look at it from an academic standpoint, you can look at it from a practical standpoint, and it's kind of like what's going on in Israel right now. Wonder how the Israelis feel about these people that came in and beheaded their babies and killed the women and all of that. And we're going to pray for Hamas, and we're going to change their hatred of us and so forth. We're going to turn the other cheek, and we're just going to continue to try to live peacefully with them and all of that. But like you said in Romans 12, as much as life in you, and those people have tried for decades to get along with those radicals and those butchers and those, I don't even know how to describe them, those animals that came in and did what they did the other day. And you think about that on a local level for us. If I knew that somebody was trying to break in my house, that they have threatened me, that they're going to kill my wife and my kids, they're coming for me, how am I going to handle that? I'm going to say, well, come on in, and I'm going to give you a cup of coffee, and what kind of meal would you like, and what kind of drink would you like, and we go sit down and just talk about that, and so forth and so on. So you got to be a little realistic, and a little practical too about those kind of things, because God had them to destroy them all. And my way of thinking, I know this is probably bad to put it on video. I hope Israel kills every one of the people that did what they did, and those people that are trying to destroy them, because you're not going to change them. I mean, they tried for 4,000 years, or however long, to get along. And I'm not saying Israel doesn't have some blame about some of it, but when you just indiscriminately just come in and do what these people did the other day, and then you're going to try to do everything you can to make peace with them. And they've had peace treaties, they've got everything, to try to change the mindset, and that's what they've tried to do. At least some of them have tried to do that, to get along and live side by side with them, And it hadn't worked out. And it's not going to work out. And so it's kind of like I was telling your mom the other day. I said, it's kind of like if you go back and look at that history of what's happened since Abraham and Hagar got together, and you look at everything that's happened since that time, and then God on various occasions, what did he tell them to do? When you go into the land, I want you to kill them all. You don't spare anybody. I want you to kill every one of them. All the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, and all of those, because if you don't, what's going to happen is you're going to intermarry with them, and you're going to be persuaded to go after their gods and the idols and so forth and so on. Joel's talked about this a lot of times. about all the times that God's gonna wipe them clean. He's gonna punish the Israelis in the Assyrian captivity, Babylonian captivity, and all the things that God did to try to get rid of the idols, which they were told not to do to begin with. You cut down their groves, you burn the images, you do all these things you've done, the homosexuality, all the things that they were doing. You don't do any of that, and because you're to serve me. And then what happened? They didn't do it. You look at Joshua and Judges, you look one after another, it lists almost all of the tribes. Then Reuben went in, and Simeon went in, and all these others went in, but they didn't do what God told them to do. They didn't do. They let them live with them, side by side with them, and look at what happened. And that's, God told them right, and as a matter of fact, when He told them to do it, He said, "You kill the women, you kill the children, the babes, the sucklings, you wipe them clean," and you didn't do it. So we're looking at it from God's standpoint. I'm just pointing out, that God had a view. You talk about the big picture. God had a view of what's going to happen down the stream of time, and He warned them, He told them, He laid out a plan for them, and He helped them. He helped them enter the land, and all the things that He did to try to get them to follow Him, and they didn't do it.
Yeah.
And so you can see the repercussions now, and that was 1,500 years before Christ. So it's been going on for 3,500 years, and if you go back even further, the 400 years of Abraham up to the time of Moses. So you got almost a 4,000 year period of the hatred that's going on in that part of the world. And I hate to say, I hate to be a pessimist, but the reality of it is it's not going to change.
Yeah.
We hear people ask lots of times, how could God be so cruel as to kill all those people, men, women, and children? But because they didn't obey God, look how many innocents have died over the hundreds of years since then that wouldn't have died. So,
Exactly.
so there's more people died than the ones that died that God told them to
Yeah.
kill, you know. And I've heard that over and over by a lot of people. I can understand why God could tell them to kill men, women, and children, and animals and everything.
Yeah.
You remember how angry God was with Saul when He just spared one of them, when He spared Agag. So much so He said, "The kingdom's going to be taken away from you. You're not going to be king much longer." So you didn't. Oh yeah, I've obeyed God. I've done everything He told me to do. Yeah, I did that. Well, the people wanted to spare the best of the flock. We're going to sacrifice that to you, and so forth and so on. He had excuse after excuse. Yeah, I let the king live, but we killed all the rest of them. So you can see how God was displeased with him when He did what He did. God told him to wipe them clean. As a matter of fact, He laid it out. You don't spare anybody, men, women, children, all of them, on that particular occasion. In 1 Samuel 15, I think it is.
Yes.
And but He didn't do it. You see how displeased God was in that regard. And I hate to say that kind of thing, but how would we feel? Somebody's coming in our house. We know that they're going to do harm if we don't do something to stop it. Then that's my point.
I fully agree. The one thing that has truly bothered me over the years, and I think Lloyd might be, I'm not sure if anyone else has served in the military, but my entire military life, I was taught to hate certain people. I don't know how I feel about that.
I got out of basic training, I want to kill somebody. I mean, that's what you're trained to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and if you ever get one of those pep talks, shall we call it, from a general, that's what he's going to tell you to do. And he's going to tell you about the things that Brother Lester just got through telling you.
Well, he's going to tell you either kill or be killed.
Yeah, well, that's
Right.
true too.
Right.
And I got to clean this up a little bit, but no American ever won the war by dying for his country. He made the other poor guy die for his.
Yeah, I think Patton made a statement like that
Yeah.
before D-Day or something like
Yeah,
that.
not exactly in those words.
Yeah.
But the thing is, though, is that nobody has ever tried to drill into my head how much I want to kill that I've ever heard of before. It can even come up with. but you're instilled with that. And of course, the other thing about it is, when I'm protecting my home and my family, I guess I've said it many, many times that I believe that it's the man's responsibility that when you get a phone, when you get a knock at your door at 2 o'clock in the morning, who's responsible for going to that door? Is it the wives? Not me. That's not the answer. The answer is the man, the stronger vessel. Not to take anything away from the lady at the house, but I believe that it's my responsibility to go to that door and answer that door and to be wise as I'm doing it. Because if I'm not wise about it, they're going to plow right through me and they're going to get to my wife and my kids. And so, in a way, I'm kind of plotting on how to kill that person at my door if they're a threat.
Yeah, y'all make some good points. Kind of, I'm trying to take all that in as y'all were saying it. Think about the command, for the Israelites to kill all the men, women, children, and so forth. And I've told the kids at school this before. It's hard for us to think four-dimensionally. It's hard for us to see beyond this life. Think about killing the kids and say, well, how terrible thing that is, and it is. It's sad to see that happen. But you think a little kid that gets killed, where's it going to be if it dies? I believe it's going to be with the Lord. So in a sense, it's almost merciful when you think about it that way. It's hard for us to think about it that way. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I'm saying God sees it different than we do. That kid, if it's allowed to grow up, going to be probably lost in that environment or in that nationality that they were in. So in some ways, it's like that. When you think about killing the women, we have the mindset. You think about these women that are godly women and how terrible that would be. But I've heard my own wife say before, in talking about the middle school girls sometimes, how mean they can be to each other. So sometimes women get, and I've heard people say that after the Civil War, a lot of the guys are ready to go on with their lives, and some of those women are the ones that are really upset. And Southern women when that happens. As far as defending ourselves, yeah, absolutely. We have responsibility to that. I guess to me, I look at Romans 12 and 13 as kind of a contrast there. And I think what I have in mind by loving your enemies is in our daily relationships. People that don't get along with us, and that's kind of what I have in mind in saying that we do what we can to get along with them. There's a distinction drawn in chapter 13 where we as individuals are not supposed to be vigilantes. Now, I don't think if you're defending somebody you're defending yourself, I think that's a different category. That's not vigilante justice, that's defending yourself. But in chapter 13, it talks about the role of government. And one of the statements that Paul makes is the government doesn't wield the sword in vain. So is the government's responsibility. So you're talking about Israel. Does the Israeli government have a right to try to seek justice for what's happened? Yeah, I think that they do. So, I think there's a distinction there between us, an individual, taking matters into our own hands and this sort of thing, and the government that God has set up to deal with injustices on our planet. So to me, there's a difference in that.
Yeah, so the verse, if it be possible, if it depends on you, live peaceably. So it's that discernment that comes into play at some moment.
Right.
And so that wisdom has to be exercised at some point.
Yes.
Now, do we get it wrong? Yes, we can get it wrong. But I think that's kind of where the praying for wisdom,
right,
in any given circumstance,
yes,
comes
sir.
into play.
Okay,
Well said.
you talk about that's a good point that you made. It'd be like if these people that go on a killing spree in our country, when they'll kill 20, 30, 50 people, at some gathering. So it's not my responsibility to go out and get that person to kill all those people. That's the role of government.
Yes.
So that's the reason they set up to do that. That's not my role.
Right.
And you made a good distinction. The situation is if somebody breaking into your house, like Scott was talking about, or your government asks you to help defend your country, you have an obligation, responsibility to do that. I think this Bible plainly teaches that.
Well, we were looking at, again, just the other day in our Bible class at school, about, you remember, based on David's deathbed, he gave Solomon 3 jobs to do.
Yeah.
And one of them was to kill Joab.
Yeah.
And one of the things he mentioned about Joab is, it said, the way that David worded it, he shed the blood of wartime and peacetime.
Yeah.
When he killed Abner and Amasa.
Shimei, I was
And Shimei was the other one, yes.
go get him.
You go get him.
Don't let him go down. Don't
Yes.
go down to the grave in peace.
But again, that's the role of government. Solomon, as the judge, had the right to do so.
When the Bible says thou shalt not kill, it really means thou shalt not murder.
Right.
It's the difference between
Absolutely.
killing someone and protecting your family or
Yeah.
your home or going to war.
Well, and even, I've thought about this. This has never happened to me, but I know of a relative of mine. I didn't know this for years. I found this in the newspaper that back in like 1947 or something, he had backed over a girl with his car. He was at a store or something and backed up and killed a little 6-year-old girl. You think about, did that man murder the girl? No, it was a terrible accident, that happened. So I pray that never happens to me. If I was ever driving and had a wreck and another car was killed, I would feel terrible about that. Yet is that murder? No. That person got killed, yes, but I didn't murder that person, so I think that's a difference too. It's kind of like when you think about the cities of refuge. It's interesting to hear Moses kind of describing that, where he talked about, if somebody kills somebody in cold blood, they go to a city of refuge, they're going to be killed, they're going to put to death. But then he used the example of you're chopping wood or something, and your axe handle flies off and hits somebody. So unfortunately, that happens sometimes in life. People die accidentally. But yes, well, that's a good distinction. Murder is what God has condemned along that line.
Coach, you say like the role of government. As soon as you join the military after being a duty contractor for a while now, you're an individual, but you're a extension of the government. It's the government's will that you have to go do now. It's not, I chose to go to war with somebody.
Right.
The government puts you in that position, and you're part of the government.
Right.
It's your job at that point. But you have that distinction, and then even in daily choices, you drive enough in this country, you're going to get in a wreck, whether it's your fault, their fault, some crazy person just running through doing 100. You're doing 120 and hitting somebody and kill someone. Yeah, it's your fault. It's probably dumb on your half, but is it murder? Well, it depends on who's looking at it.
Right.
If you were out of your mind drunk, probably yes.
Right.
If you were just being a dumb teenager doing 120, well, you were being a dumb teenager at that point.
Yeah.
But that makes a good point. Even in war, except for people like Hamas and some of those people, Hezbollah, some of these others, Al Qaeda, some of those others, ISIS, there are rules of war, except there are rules of war. And what the Israelis are trying to do now is get them to move out so that they won't kill innocent people. And you as an individual, like Dale told me, the government calls you to do that, to go to war. It's not up to me to kill all these innocent people either.
Right.
They had nothing
Right.
to do with it. You're trying to defend your homeland or to do whatever you got to do to stop the enemy. But the innocent people, it's like Israel's making a distinction even now of the people that they want to kill, as opposed to all these innocent Palestinians get out. We provide a way for you to get out before we come in, kind of thing. So even they made a distinction.
Well, and part of the problem nowadays is as soon as you started the war on terror and Hamas and all, they all look like everybody.
Right.
So if you say innocents get out and they all leave with them, you've accomplished nothing. And they're bad enough in their own mind that they will set missile launches on top of a school building. So when Israel retaliates, it lands on a school. But at that point, you've got to just say, hey, well, you put your own people at risk by doing this. I'm going to defend myself. I'm going to launch rockets back at you.
Absolutely.
And they're going to hit whatever they hit.
Yeah.
They're being nicer than and it sounds mean, but you come in and start bombing me, you just would have went, okay, we're done.
Yeah.
But they're giving all the innocent people a chance to get out, but it's just like us fighting the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. They're wars you can't win because someone's always going to get away, and no one's in uniform on the other side. So you don't really know who you're fighting.
That's the problem in Vietnam.
Right.
that You know who the enemy was.
Right,
Exactly.
right.
And our boys were taught to go in there if they found something in a village. They were taught that they were supposed to kill everybody in that village, men, women, and children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a terrible thing to have to live with.
Yeah,
Well, and then you've got corrupt leadership that told Lieutenant Calley back in the day to go in and wipe out the village. He was following orders. It's not what he went in there to do. He was sent in there to do it.
right.
Of course, he went in, did his job. And the other interesting thing is when you got a job to do, aren't you supposed to do it well? Now that really kind of cuts me to the core. Because I'm supposed to be as vicious as I possibly can be. And so focused on my duty at hand that when you wake up, I mean, you're awake, but when you truly come back to yourself and then realize what you have done, now you get to live with it.
Right. Right.
And then now that you're living with it, at what point do you stop and you start rationalizing the good? One other thing, I always thought it was very interesting that not only did God say kill the children, the women, and the men, but also the animals.
Yeah. What did animals do?
And
What good did animals do?
you know, I guess maybe in a way I always looked at that as that God said that He would provide. That's not those. Let me take care of providing for you. Let's don't worry about your enemy
Right.
trying to provide for you.
Well, I think that was just a way of not giving them a reward for
Yeah.
what we sent them to do.
Yes, I think that's a great point. Yeah, so people on the outside would look at that and see their motive wasn't to take what they had; it was God's judgment, for what they had done wrong. Great point. Great point. All right, thank y'all for your great questions and comments today.
Yeah, I want to.